May 19, 1940. Warsaw, Poland. The city was alive with a restless energy, though it was the kind that comes just before a storm. Smoke still curled faintly from distant ruins where German artillery had tested the Polish defences, and the air smelled faintly of ash and wet earth. On the cobbled streets, a young man in a worn brown coat adjusted the strap of his satchel and scanned the crowd. His eyes were sharp, calculating, but beneath them lay a weight few could understand. Witold Pilecki was 29 years old, a man who had known both discipline and danger all his life. Born into a Warsaw family that prized courage and education, he had fought in the Polish-Soviet War, had been a cavalry officer in the interwar Polish army, and now found himself at the very edge of a world tearing itself apart. Poland had been a nation of paradoxes, vibrant, modern in some places, rural and ancient in others. Warsaw's streets told the story, elegant cafes and bookstores, children kicking balls in the square, but under the surface, a fear that gripped the city like a second skin. The German invasion had been swift, brutal, almost surgical. In weeks, cities fell, bridges were destroyed, armies routed, and yet life did not stop entirely. It could not yet. Pilecki had a mission that seemed impossible even to him. He would infiltrate the very heart of Germany's terror in Poland, Auschwitz. It was not yet the industrialized nightmare the world would later know in history books. To him and a few whispered contacts in the underground, it was already becoming a killing ground, a laboratory for cruelty. The Nazis were methodical in their horror, and Pilecki had decided that understanding that horror from within was the only way to resist it effectively. His decision had not been made lightly. Friends argued, family feared, but he understood a simple truth that few would admit. The war would not wait for courage to arrive. One could wait on the sidelines and survive, or one could act and risk everything. He chose the latter. July 1940. Warsaw Ghetto, night. The ghetto was a city within a city, a walled-off prison full of starving, frightened men, women and children. Pilecki had volunteered to smuggle himself into this world, to become a prisoner, to observe, record and organize. He walked through shadowed alleys, careful to avoid the German patrols, listening to the whispers of the underground couriers, names, dates, shipments, the slow unraveling of normal life into systematic extermination. "Do you know what you're asking, Witold?" a voice asked. It was Stefan, his friend from the underground, a former schoolteacher turned courier. His hands shook slightly as he lit a cigarette. "I do," Pilecki said, his voice steady. "This is not just about survival. This is about truth, about history. If we wait, millions will die without anyone knowing why, without anyone being able to stop it. I have to go inside." Stefan's face was pale, the faint light of the cigarette illuminating the worry etched in his eyes. "Inside Auschwitz?" "Yes, and I will report everything, every detail, every death, every method, everything, and we will resist, even from within." September 1940. Arrest and transfer. Pilecki was arrested in a street sweep. The pretense was a simple Polish resistance roundup, suspicious individuals, potential saboteurs, anyone who might oppose the German occupation. He did not resist. His papers were fake but convincing. His explanation for being a wanderer in the streets was simple. He was jobless, lost, in need of employment. The German officers examined him briefly, then processed him with a dismissive efficiency that belied the horrors ahead. The journey to Auschwitz began in a cattle car packed with Polish men, women, and children. The air was thick with fear, sweat, and the stench of what would become a permanent memory in his mind. Faces pressed against the wooden slats, eyes wide, silent tears tracing dusty cheeks. Conversation was minimal. Survival was about conserving energy and spirit. Every moment counted. Every observation mattered. Pilecki noted small things. The way the guards moved, the code words whispered in Polish, the huddled groups of prisoners trying to comfort one another. Even in the earliest days, patterns began to emerge. The hierarchies within prisoners, the arbitrary punishments, the whispers of hope carried in notes smuggled between cells. October 1940. Arrival at Auschwitz. The camp was quiet at first, a deceptive quiet, the kind that promised order and efficiency but hid a storm beneath its surface. Pilecki remembered the watchtowers, the barbed wire, the prisoners being marched to roll calls in the pale dawn light. He noted every detail, the identification numbers tattooed on wrists, the way inmates moved to avoid drawing attention, the hierarchy imposed by the SS guards. Block 17 was where he would spend his initial weeks, cramped, foul, overfilled with men who had already begun to understand the slow rhythm of death. Hunger gnawed constantly, and the lack of warmth cut through even the thickest clothing. Yet even in this environment, small acts of defiance occurred. A secret note slipped under a door, a loaf of bread shared, a whispered warning about the guard's next cruel twist. Pilecki observed, recorded, and catalogued. Every small act of humanity was proof that resistance was possible, even here. He began to speak in whispers to fellow prisoners, gauging trust, planting seeds of a clandestine network. It was slow, painstaking, dangerous work. One wrong move could lead to execution. And yet, over weeks, trust began to form. Men who had been strangers began coordinating, sharing food, exchanging information, smuggling messages to the outside. Pilecki's plan was taking shape. November 1940, the network within. The Polish underground movement within Auschwitz was tentative at first. Pilecki was careful, methodical, much like he had been during his time as a cavalry officer. Every contact he made, every alliance formed, was documented in his mind and later written in hidden journals. Resistance was not about fighting openly, it was about observation, communication, and preparation. He spoke to the men quietly. We must not lose ourselves to despair. We must learn, record, survive. And one day we will use what we learn to save others. The men nodded, some with skepticism, some with hope. Each day was a test. Each day required balance between survival and action. Smuggling notes to the outside took weeks to organize. Couriers risked being shot on sight. But eventually small packages of information, meticulously concealed, reached Warsaw, detailing the conditions, the death tolls, and the methods of extermination beginning to take shape. The SS guards were always nearby, always watching, yet they underestimated the quiet cunning of the human spirit. They believed order could suppress courage. They believed fear could eliminate resistance. They were wrong. December 1940. Patterns of survival. Winter descended with a brutal insistence, blanketing Auschwitz in snow that turned into icy slush beneath the prisoners' worn boots. The camp was a study in both cruelty and efficiency. Pilecki observed everything: the routines of the SS, the forced labor schedules, the methods used to break the prisoner's spirit, and the subtle ways men resisted. He noted the roll calls at dawn and dusk, where men were counted in freezing temperatures, often for hours. Even the weakest who could not stand were forced to remain upright. Those who fell or faltered risked immediate execution. Yet within this rigid structure he saw the first signs of organized resistance. Small groups had begun exchanging notes in Polish, developing codes to communicate about work assignments, guards' shifts, and the arrival of new prisoners. Pilecki spent hours memorizing patterns. Which barracks had men most likely to be sympathetic? Which labor assignments allowed discreet observation of the camp's inner workings? Which guards could be misled without arousing suspicion? Every detail mattered, every misstep could cost lives. He began to draft a mental map of the camp's structure, noting which zones were most vulnerable to sabotage or intelligence-gathering missions. He learned the language of survival, the quick nods, the subtle hand gestures, the shared glances that conveyed warnings or encouragement. These small gestures, almost imperceptible to the guards, became the foundation of a nascent underground network within the camp. January 1941. Smuggling and documentation. Pilecki understood that observation alone was insufficient. The world outside Auschwitz had to know the truth. He began preparing detailed reports, memorizing the conditions of the camp, the number of prisoners in each block, the work schedules, and the patterns of death. He observed the systematic process by which prisoners were selected for execution, noting dates, locations, and methods. At night, in the dark corners of the barracks, he would whisper instructions to trusted men. "Record everything. Remember every face, every number, every detail. These will be our evidence. One day, they must see what has happened here." The risk was constant. The SS were vigilant, and punishment for clandestine activity was immediate. Yet Pilecki moved with careful precision, establishing a network of trusted men who acted as couriers, memorizing reports that would eventually be smuggled out of the camp to the Polish resistance. His reports included not just statistics but context, the psychological toll on prisoners, the breakdown of social structures, the ways men and women found fleeting moments of humanity even under the shadow of death. He catalogued forced labor assignments, noting which factories were producing armaments, which were repairing railway lines, and which were being used purely to extract labor without concern for efficiency. March 1941. Observation of the SS. The SS guards themselves became a subject of study. Pilecki observed how fear and indoctrination shaped their behavior. Some were methodical and cold, following orders without hesitation. Others were erratic, their cruelty a mask for insecurity. He noted patterns, which officers were likely to follow orders without question, which could be manipulated, which were most unpredictable. He learned how to exploit the system without being caught. When a guard demanded a laborer work beyond capacity, Pilecki would subtly redirect the group, ensuring the weakest were shielded while maintaining the illusion of compliance. Small acts of defiance, executed carefully, could save lives without attracting attention. At night, in whispered conversations, he trained men in observation and reporting techniques. "Remember, our strength is knowledge," he would say. "If the world knows what happens here, there is a chance for justice, there is a chance for survival." April 1941. Resistance Organization. By spring, Pilecki's underground network was operational. Men from different barracks met secretly in the shadows, exchanging information, sharing food, and coordinating minor acts of sabotage. A broken tool here, a misdirected delivery there. These small interventions slowed production just enough to create openings for resistance without triggering full-scale reprisals. Pilecki documented each intervention meticulously. He knew the importance of data, of evidence. Every act, every reaction, every consequence was recorded mentally, then transcribed in secret. These reports would eventually be sent to Warsaw, forming the first detailed intelligence on Auschwitz's internal operations. He also observed the arrival of new prisoners. Each transport brought a wave of fear, despair, and sometimes hope. Pilecki catalogued the nationalities, ages, and conditions of those arriving, building a statistical understanding of the camp's growth and capacity. He noted the methods by which the Nazis dehumanized the prisoners, the removal of personal belongings, the tattooing of numbers, the forced haircuts, and the stripping of clothing and identity. June 1941. The scale of horror. By mid-1941, the systematic nature of the camp became undeniable. Pilecki witnessed the expansion of facilities designed specifically for extermination, the construction of crematoria, the organization of transport schedules for mass deportations, and the emergence of specialized units within the SS for efficient execution of orders. He documented everything: numbers of prisoners, frequency of executions, the methods used to kill, and the reactions of survivors. He noted the psychological strategies employed by the Nazis: fear, dehumanization, and manipulation to maintain control over the prisoners. Yet, even amidst this horror, Pilecki observed resilience. Men and women adapted to survive, forming tight-knit groups, sharing meager food, and finding ways to maintain personal dignity. He recorded their stories, the moments of courage and solidarity that resisted total despair. These stories would later be crucial in demonstrating the humanity that persisted even in the darkest circumstances. August 1941. Escalation of atrocities. The summer brought changes. The camp's population swelled, and with it, the intensity of brutality. Pilecki noted that the SS had begun implementing more systematic methods of extermination. He observed the early experiments with gas chambers, the scheduling of mass executions, and the forced labor required to dispose of bodies. Pilecki's reports became increasingly urgent. He knew that the outside world had to understand the scale of what was happening. The Polish underground received coded messages describing not only the atrocities but also the organization, logistics, and personnel involved. Each detail was a piece of evidence that would one day hold perpetrators accountable. He also focused on strategic intelligence, which industrial facilities within Auschwitz were critical to the German war effort, which supplies were essential, and where vulnerabilities existed. His dual mission, documenting the Holocaust and gathering intelligence for military purposes, required constant vigilance and careful prioritization. October 1941. Psychological warfare. Pilecki began training trusted prisoners in psychological resilience and intelligence-gathering techniques. They were taught how to observe without attracting attention, how to memorize details, and how to communicate information discreetly. Small acts of defiance became tools for survival: silent refusal, subtle sabotage, and coded communication. He also studied the psychology of the SS guards. Understanding their fears, prejudices, and motivations allowed prisoners to predict behavior and avoid unnecessary punishment. Pilecki noted the subtle differences between high-ranking officers and regular guards, mapping their habits, weaknesses, and patterns of cruelty. Even the simplest observations, how guards walked, how they interacted, how they responded to non-compliance, were recorded in detail. These insights would prove critical for planning future interventions and for understanding how the camp maintained control over thousands of prisoners. December 1941. The first comprehensive report. By the end of the year, Pilecki had compiled a detailed report of Auschwitz's operations, prisoner population, and the evolving methods of extermination. The report included diagrams, statistical estimates, and first-hand accounts. It was smuggled out in stages through the underground network, reaching Warsaw and eventually the Polish government in exile in London. The report shocked the Allied leadership. While rumors of atrocities existed, the scale, organization, and efficiency of Auschwitz were beyond imagination. Pilecki's meticulous documentation provided the first credible evidence of the industrialized nature of Nazi extermination. January 1942. Life in the midst of death. Daily life in Auschwitz continued under constant threat. Pilecki observed the rotation of forced labor assignments, the allocation of food, and the hierarchy imposed among prisoners. Those who attempted to escape or resist faced immediate execution, yet the underground network persisted. Pilecki emphasized the importance of morale and solidarity. Small acts, sharing bread, whispering encouragement, teaching literacy, became acts of resistance in themselves. He documented these acts as evidence that even in the most oppressive conditions, humanity persisted. Spring 1942. The network grows. As winter gave way to spring, Pilecki's network expanded. Men from different nationalities, Poles, Jews, Ukrainians, and others, were slowly brought into the fold. He carefully assessed their trustworthiness, understanding that a single betrayal could destroy everything. Each new member underwent a rigorous vetting process: observation of behavior under stress, ability to memorize and relay information, and capacity for discretion. The underground network became a lifeline for the prisoners. Messages were smuggled between barracks using scraps of paper hidden in clothing, bread, or hollowed-out tools. Each report documented the camp's population, deaths, labor assignments, and SS activities. Pilecki trained his men in memory techniques. Every detail mattered, from the numbers of prisoners in each barrack to the movements of key SS officers. He also emphasized the moral dimension of their work. "Do not let this place break you," he would whisper. "Every act of courage, every life saved, every piece of information is part of the evidence the world must see. We are witnesses, and witnesses have power." June 1942. Industrial observation. Auschwitz was not only a site of extermination, it was a critical labor hub for the German war effort. Pilecki meticulously recorded the functions of each factory, workshop, and labor assignment. He noted which materials were produced, how efficiently laborers were utilized, and which processes were most critical to the Reich. He discovered the Germans' reliance on forced labor from occupied territories. Thousands of men, women, and children were transported to Auschwitz to replace German workers conscripted into the Wehrmacht. Pilecki documented the conditions: malnutrition, abuse, exhaustion, and systematic brutality. These were not incidental, they were integral to the camp's function as both extermination and industrial center. His intelligence reports included maps of factory layouts, routes for transport of raw materials and finished products, and the vulnerabilities of each facility. These reports were intended not only for historical record but for future Allied strategic planning, should they choose to target industrial capacity as a means of crippling the German war machine. August 1942. Selection and survival. Pilecki observed with horror the selection process, where prisoners deemed unfit for labor were sent to their deaths. He memorized the faces, the ages, and the approximate number of those executed each day. This process, he realized, was both a method of control and a statistical tool for the Nazis. They eliminated those whose labor could not contribute to production while simultaneously terrorizing the rest. He counseled his men in strategies for survival. Work assignments, physical conditioning, and mental resilience were all essential. Small gestures, sharing food, offering encouragement, or feigning obedience could preserve life. Pilecki became a teacher of survival, showing that observation, discipline, and patience were as critical as courage. He also began documenting patterns in the SS behavior. Certain officers were predictable in their cruelty, others more impulsive. Understanding these patterns allowed prisoners to anticipate punishments, avoid confrontations, and in some cases exploit weaknesses in the guards' routines. October 1942. Smuggling out intelligence. By autumn, Pilecki had established a sophisticated system for transmitting intelligence to the outside world. Trusted couriers carried coded messages through a network that eventually reached Warsaw and the Polish resistance leadership. The reports included not only statistics and observations, but also personal testimonies from prisoners, evidence of the atrocities that could not be ignored. Pilecki understood the stakes. "If the world does not know what is happening here," he said quietly, "then history will judge us all as complicit. Our duty is to record the truth, to survive long enough to deliver it, and to ensure that justice can one day be served." The reports were smuggled in increments, hidden in tools, clothing, or packages ostensibly sent to laborers' families. Each successful transmission was a victory, a reminder that even in the heart of Auschwitz resistance was possible. December 1942. The first evidence of the gas chambers. During the winter months, Pilecki observed the camp's increasing reliance on gas chambers. He watched as prisoners were led to specially constructed facilities, stripped and killed with Zyklon B. The bodies were cremated in furnaces that burned continuously, leaving little evidence beyond smoke and ash. He documented everything meticulously: the construction of the chambers, the schedules of executions, and the identities of the victims whenever possible. He understood that these details were crucial, both for future prosecution of war criminals and for ensuring that the world could not claim ignorance. Pilecki's intelligence reports now included diagrams of the gas chambers, estimates of their capacity, and descriptions of the processes used to deceive victims into compliance. He noted the complicity of certain guards, the efficiency of the killings, and the psychological mechanisms used to normalize murder. February 1943. Resilience and morale. Despite the unrelenting horror, Pilecki focused on morale. He encouraged cultural activities, clandestine education, and the preservation of faith. Small acts, singing, secret readings, even whispered poetry, became lifelines of humanity. Pilecki also emphasized solidarity. Prisoners were taught to support one another, to share food, and to communicate cautiously but persistently. Every act of mutual aid, he noted, increased the likelihood of survival. In his reports, he described these efforts not as trivial distractions but as strategic interventions that sustained human life and spirit in an environment designed to extinguish both. April 1943. Observation of new arrivals. Pilecki meticulously recorded the arrival of new transports, noting the condition, nationality, and approximate number of prisoners. These arrivals were critical for understanding the scale of the Nazi extermination effort. He documented how prisoners were stripped of identity, tattooed, and assigned labor tasks. Each new transport was a data point, an addition to the growing evidence he was compiling. He also began to note the responses of prisoners, who adapted, who resisted, and who succumbed to despair. This psychological data informed the strategies of the underground network, allowing them to allocate resources, provide support, and plan interventions with greater precision. June 1943. Understanding the camp's logistics. By mid-1943, Pilecki had developed an in-depth understanding of Auschwitz's logistical operations. He noted the scheduling of work shifts, the allocation of food, the rotation of laborers, and the transport of prisoners between camps. He documented the bureaucratic mechanisms that enabled mass murder and forced labor to function simultaneously. He also focused on industrial output, recording the types and quantities of goods produced, the labor required, and the efficiency of production. This intelligence was vital, not only for understanding the economic dimension of Auschwitz, but also for informing future Allied operations aimed at disrupting the German war machine. August 1943. The camp's expansion. Auschwitz continued to grow both in population and infrastructure. New barracks were built, additional crematoria constructed, and more forced laborers brought from occupied territories. Pilecki documented these expansions, noting the strategic importance of different sectors and the potential vulnerabilities within the system. He also observed changes in SS leadership, recording the behavior, habits, and tendencies of new officers. Understanding these personnel shifts was critical for predicting patterns of cruelty and identifying opportunities for intervention. October 1943. The network strengthens. By autumn, Pilecki's underground network was highly organized. Information flowed efficiently from barracks to couriers, then to Warsaw and beyond. Men were trained in memory techniques, coded communication, and the importance of discretion. Pilecki emphasized the dual nature of their work, survival and intelligence gathering. "We live in the shadows," he reminded them, "but the world must see what happens here. Every detail you remember, every observation you make is a weapon against tyranny." The network also engaged in small acts of sabotage within the camp, disrupting production, misdirecting labor, and subtly undermining the SS without attracting detection. Each success, no matter how minor, was a proof of agency in a system designed to eliminate it. December 1943. Evidence of industrialized murder. By the end of 1943, Pilecki's reports were comprehensive. They included not only eyewitness accounts of mass executions, but detailed analyses of the camp's industrial operations, labor efficiency, and logistical management. He had documented patterns in the SS, the behavior of prisoners, and the psychological mechanisms of control. These reports were critical for the Polish resistance, the Allied leadership, and ultimately for historians seeking to understand Auschwitz. Pilecki had transformed observation into intelligence, documenting genocide not only as a moral catastrophe but as a systematic, industrialized process that required careful analysis to comprehend fully. January 1944. Signs of a shift. The new year brought changes in the camp's operations. Pilecki noted that the SS intensified both killings and labor demands. Prisoners were pushed harder, rations reduced further, and surveillance became even more intrusive. Yet paradoxically, the Germans also sought to streamline production, introducing small innovations in workshops to maintain output, despite constant shortages of materials and manpower. Pilecki meticulously recorded these changes. He understood that while the camp's brutality increased, its industrial function remained critical to the German war effort. By combining observations of both the extermination apparatus and the labor economy, he created a comprehensive picture of Auschwitz as a machine of both murder and productivity. He reinforced to his network the importance of careful observation. Every shift change, every transport, every death, and every piece of material produced was intelligence. These were not trivial details. They were evidence that could be used to hold the regime accountable. March 1944. Allies prepare for D-Day. News from the outside world trickled in via couriers and radio broadcasts. Pilecki listened closely to reports of Allied planning for the invasion of France. He understood that the intelligence his network provided could help shape broader military strategy. If the Allies knew what was happening in Auschwitz, they could take steps to disrupt German production and supply lines, or at least prepare for post-war justice. Pilecki also monitored the flow of prisoners from occupied Poland and Hungary. The increasing number of Jewish transports hinted at the scale of the Nazi extermination effort, and Pilecki began compiling demographic data, numbers, ages, genders, and nationalities to illustrate the systematic targeting of entire populations. May 1944. The Hungarian transports. In May, Pilecki observed the arrival of Hungarian Jews. Trains unloaded thousands of people in a single day. Men, women, and children were separated immediately, with many sent directly to the gas chambers. The efficiency and scale of the operation shocked even him. He documented the logistics, the number of prisoners per train, the method of selection, the assignment of labor, and the use of deception, telling prisoners they were being resettled or deloused to maintain order. This intelligence would later prove critical in understanding the speed and scale of the Holocaust in Hungary. Pilecki also noted the psychological impact on the prisoners. The Hungarian arrivals were terrified, disoriented, and often unwilling to believe the reality of Auschwitz. His network provided guidance and support, helping them navigate the camp, avoid immediate death, and retain hope for survival. July 1944. The Warsaw Uprising. The news of the Warsaw Uprising reached Auschwitz in July. Pilecki understood its significance immediately. Poles in the city were rising against German occupation, risking everything to reclaim their homeland. While the uprising in Warsaw would ultimately fail, it was a stark reminder of the broader resistance against Nazi tyranny. Pilecki's reports to the outside world now included not only details of camp operations, but commentary on the broader implications of German occupation policies. He noted that the extermination of Jews and the forced labor system were not isolated atrocities. They were part of a calculated strategy to support Germany's war machine while terrorizing occupied populations. August 1944. Preparing for escape. By late summer, Pilecki began planning a bold initiative, escape. His primary mission was intelligence gathering, but he understood that surviving and reaching Allied lines would allow him to provide first-hand testimony that no courier could fully convey. Escape required precision. Pilecki studied guard rotations, supply deliveries, and transport schedules. He noted which sections of the camp were least monitored, the timing of patrols, and potential allies among prisoners who could assist without risking detection. Every detail was memorized and catalogued. He also trained his network for the possibility of his departure. Communications had to continue without him. Certain members were instructed on how to relay reports independently, while others were tasked with maintaining morale and order within the underground structure. October 1944. The fuel crisis in the Reich. Through fragments of information smuggled into the camp, Pilecki became aware of a critical development. Germany was facing severe fuel shortages. Factories in Berlin and the Ruhr were operating at reduced capacity, and transportation networks were disrupted by Allied bombing. This information validated much of Pilecki's intelligence. Auschwitz was part of a broader system, one that was increasingly strained by Allied strategic bombing and resource shortages. He made detailed notes on the potential impact. Reduced transportation could slow deportations, lower production of war materials, and perhaps create opportunities for sabotage. Pilecki's awareness of the Reich's vulnerabilities did not reduce the horror within Auschwitz. The camp's extermination processes continued unabated, and prisoners' lives remained in constant peril. Yet understanding the larger context gave him a framework for hope, a strategic lens through which to view survival and resistance. December 1944. Personal losses. Winter brought both death and reflection. Several members of Pilecki's network were executed or sent to gas chambers for minor infractions or suspected resistance activities. Each loss was a blow, but it also underscored the stakes of their mission. Pilecki used these tragedies to reinforce discipline and resolve. He reminded his men that intelligence gathering was not a theoretical exercise, it was a battle of survival, a fight for evidence that would matter long after the war. He instructed them to remain vigilant, to avoid unnecessary risks, and to continue documenting every atrocity, every industrial process, and every detail of life and death in the camp. January 1945. The Soviet advance. As 1945 began, Soviet forces advanced from the east. Pilecki observed the camp's reaction, heightened tension, increased brutality, and frantic preparation for potential evacuations. The SS began destroying evidence, dismantling certain facilities, and moving prisoners deeper into the camp or toward other locations. Pilecki noted the logistical chaos. Guards were stretched thin, resources were scarce, and the risk of disorder increased. He recorded these developments in real time, recognizing that the camp's internal instability could create both danger and opportunity for his network. February 1945. The evacuation orders. In February, rumors spread of the evacuation of Auschwitz. Pilecki's intelligence confirmed that the Nazis planned to move prisoners westward, away from the advancing Soviets. These death marches would claim thousands of lives. Pilecki prepared his network for this eventuality. Key members were instructed to maintain intelligence-gathering operations during forced relocations, to memorize routes, guard patterns, and numbers of prisoners. Pilecki understood that even in transit, information could be collected. Every statistic, every observation, every survivor's testimony mattered. March 1945. Final observations. By March, Auschwitz was a shadow of its former self. Many of the industrial operations had slowed or ceased due to fuel shortages and transportation disruptions. The crematoria were overwhelmed by the influx of prisoners from other camps. Yet Pilecki's network continued to function, relaying critical intelligence about camp operations, German industrial capabilities, and prisoner conditions. Pilecki began consolidating his own knowledge in preparation for escape. He created mental maps, memorized key routines, and identified potential weaknesses in the camp's perimeter. He also documented the final months of the SS administration, noting the desperation and fear that increasingly characterized German behavior. April 1945. The decision to escape. As Soviet forces approached, Pilecki realized that time was running out. Staying in the camp would limit the impact of his intelligence reports. Escaping and delivering first-hand testimony to the Polish resistance would ensure that the full scope of Auschwitz's atrocities could be communicated. The escape was meticulously planned. Pilecki selected a date when guard attention was likely to be divided, coordinated with trusted members of the network, and prepared a route through forested terrain that would minimize the risk of capture. He also ensured that key intelligence documents would survive even if he were killed. Some were hidden in barracks, others carried by couriers, and all contained coded information that could be pieced together by trusted members of the resistance. April 26, 1945. The night before escape. The evening air was cold and still. Pilecki sat in the corner of his barracks, reviewing in his mind every detail of the escape plan. Every guard rotation, every sentry post, every flashlight sweep had been memorized. He traced the perimeter routes with his fingers in the dirt floor, imagining the movements of his fellow prisoners and the timing of each action. He was not alone in this. Two of his most trusted men, Jerzy and Stanislaw, huddled nearby. Each understood that failure meant death, not just for them, but for anyone implicated in the plan. Pilecki reassured them, reminding them that careful preparation was their shield. Every detail had been rehearsed, every risk calculated. Outside, the camp was unnervingly quiet. Most prisoners were confined to barracks after the evening roll call, unaware that the escape plan was being finalized in whispers. The SS were distracted by news from the front. Soviet forces were only a few dozen kilometers away, and panic was beginning to spread among the guards. Pilecki's focus was on timing. He would act when guard attention was lowest, exploiting shifts and relying on the cover of darkness. Each member of the escape team carried only what was essential: a knife, a small ration, and a piece of paper containing crucial observations and coded intelligence for the Polish resistance. April 27, 1945. The escape begins. The plan went into action just after midnight. Pilecki and his companions slipped silently from the barracks, avoiding patrolling guards and searchlights. The first obstacle was the outer fence, a combination of barbed wire, watchtowers, and the ever-present threat of dogs. Pilecki led the group to a section of fencing that he had observed was poorly maintained. With careful precision, he cut a small opening using a smuggled tool. Each man passed through in turn, holding their breath as the wind carried sounds from the distant barracks. The dogs did not detect them, and the guards remained unaware. Once beyond the perimeter, the escapees moved quickly through the forest. The terrain was uneven, with dense undergrowth and hidden ditches, but Pilecki had memorized a safe path from months of observation. Every rustle of leaves, every distant shout set their nerves on edge, yet the group pressed forward, driven by urgency and a sense of duty. April 28, 1945. Reaching friendly territory. By morning, the group had covered several kilometers, avoiding known patrol routes and German checkpoints. Exhausted but alive, they reached a small village where local Polish resistance members had arranged safe houses. Here, Pilecki finally felt the first semblance of relief. He was no longer in immediate danger, but the mission was far from over. The intelligence he carried, observations of Auschwitz operations, labor details, and transport logistics, was now more valuable than ever. Polish resistance leaders received the reports with astonishment. The scale and systematic nature of Auschwitz, as documented by Pilecki and his network, provided evidence that would later contribute to the prosecution of Nazi leaders. May 1945. Delivering the reports. Pilecki and his team worked quickly to ensure that the intelligence reached the highest levels of the Polish underground, and ultimately the Allies. The documents included meticulous counts of prisoners, detailed descriptions of SS methods, and reports on industrial production tied to the war effort. The reports were coded to protect the identities of those still inside the camp. Names were replaced with numbers, locations were disguised, and critical data was encrypted using methods taught by the resistance. Despite these precautions, every document carried the weight of truth, hard evidence of systematic murder and exploitation. Pilecki understood the significance. He had risked his life not merely for survival, but to ensure that the world would see what was happening in Auschwitz, and that the methods of Nazi industrial and extermination operations could be studied, understood, and ultimately stopped. June 1945. Liberation of Auschwitz. By the time Soviet forces entered Auschwitz in late January 1945, Pilecki had already escaped and delivered his intelligence. The liberation revealed the full extent of the horrors he had documented: tens of thousands of prisoners dead or dying, emaciated survivors, and evidence of industrialized murder on an unimaginable scale. Pilecki's reports became foundational for understanding the camp's operations. Investigators, historians, and later war crimes tribunals drew directly from the detailed records he had helped compile. Every observation he made, the logistics of forced labor, the structure of camp administration, the patterns of transport and extermination, provided critical insight into Nazi methodology. Post-war Poland and the political reality. After the war, Pilecki returned to a Poland caught between liberation and occupation. The Red Army had liberated the country from German forces, but Soviet influence quickly transformed Poland into a satellite state. Pilecki, once celebrated in the resistance, now faced suspicion from the communist authorities. He continued his efforts to document Nazi crimes and support former prisoners, but the political climate was hostile to independent voices. Pilecki refused to compromise his principles, insisting on accurate historical records, recognition for resistance members, and the preservation of truth. October 1945. Testimonies and trials. Pilecki provided detailed testimonies during the early post-war investigations. His first-hand accounts were invaluable in preparing evidence against Nazi war criminals. He described the inner workings of Auschwitz with precision, transport numbers, labor assignments, conditions in the barracks, and the systematic execution of prisoners. The testimonies were corroborated by other survivors and resistance members, cementing Pilecki's reputation as a credible and meticulous observer. His reports contributed not only to war crimes trials but also to early historiography of the Holocaust, shaping how the world understood industrialized murder and forced labor systems. 1946 to 1947. Personal struggles and recognition. Pilecki faced increasing danger from the new political regime. His refusal to align with Soviet-backed authorities, combined with his dedication to independent truth-telling, made him a target. Yet he persisted, continuing to gather and preserve information about the war, the Holocaust, and Nazi crimes. During this period, he also worked to support former resistance members, assisting in reintegration and documenting the experiences of those who had survived concentration camps. His meticulous records and intelligence summaries became invaluable historical documents. 1948, arrest and imprisonment. Despite his contributions, Pilecki's independence drew the attention of Poland's communist authorities. In 1948, he was arrested on charges of espionage and conspiracy against the state. The charges were fabricated, but the trial was relentless. Pilecki faced interrogation, forced confessions, and political theater designed to discredit him. Even in prison, he remained resolute. He refused to falsely implicate former colleagues or exaggerate claims against the regime. His courage and integrity in the face of oppression became emblematic of his lifelong commitment to truth and justice. 1950. Execution and legacy. After a show trial, Pilecki was sentenced to death. On May 25, 1950, he was executed in Warsaw. Official records minimized his role in the resistance, but those who knew the truth remembered a man of extraordinary bravery, intelligence, and moral clarity. Pilecki's story remained largely suppressed in Poland for decades, but his legacy endured through the testimonies he left behind, the intelligence reports he delivered, and the meticulous documentation of Auschwitz's horrors. His life became a symbol of resistance against tyranny, the importance of courage in the face of overwhelming danger, and the power of meticulous observation to shape history. Impact on history and memory. Pilecki's intelligence contributed to early Allied understanding of Auschwitz and Nazi industrial operations. His work influenced not only war crimes trials, but also post-war military and strategic thinking. The principle that industrial capacity, logistics, and supply chains are decisive in modern warfare can trace some of its understanding to the detailed observations he risked everything to gather. Historians in later decades drew upon Pilecki's reports to reconstruct the scale of the Holocaust, the mechanisms of forced labor, and the strategic use of concentration camps within the Nazi war economy. His meticulous record-keeping demonstrated that even in the darkest circumstances, disciplined observation and careful documentation could preserve truth for future generations. Pilecki's enduring legacy. Even after his execution, Witold Pilecki's contributions continued to resonate, both in Poland and across the world. His meticulous documentation of Auschwitz provided the Allies with an unparalleled inside view of the camp's operations. While other intelligence reports existed, none matched the precision and courage of Pilecki's work. Historians later noted that his observations revealed the true scale of Nazi industrialized murder, the systematic use of forced labor, and the resilience of prisoners under unimaginable conditions. These insights would form the backbone of understanding not only Auschwitz, but the broader Nazi war economy, illustrating how ideology, logistics, and industry intersected in one of history's most horrific crimes. Strategic lessons from Pilecki's intelligence. Pilecki's work also had an unexpected impact on military thinking. By documenting how Nazi Germany organized its labor, maintained production, and attempted to sustain its war machine under extreme duress, he inadvertently provided lessons on resilience, supply chains, and the limits of industrial capacity. Just as Paul Nitzer had discovered in Germany after interrogating Albert Speer, modern warfare was not won solely through courage or tactical brilliance, but by material capacity and the ability to sustain production under pressure. Pilecki's reports contributed to this understanding, offering concrete evidence of how a nation could be sustained or collapsed through the control of labor, resources, and logistics. Military analysts in later decades, studying the Second World War, recognized that Pilecki had illustrated the human side of industrialized warfare. His accounts showed how coerced labor and forced productivity could temporarily compensate for losses, but that no system relying on exploitation and terror could withstand overwhelming external pressure indefinitely. In this sense, Pilecki's observations complemented strategic bombing surveys, demonstrating that both material and human factors determined the outcome of conflicts, rediscovery, and recognition. For decades, Pilecki's story remained largely suppressed in Poland, largely because of the political climate under Soviet influence. Independent voices were silenced, resistance heroes were marginalized, and his execution was glossed over or misrepresented. However, beginning in the 1980s, historians and journalists began to uncover the full extent of his actions. Archives were opened, testimonies cross-referenced, and his reports analyzed in context. Scholars recognized him not only as a hero of the Polish resistance, but as one of the few individuals to voluntarily enter Auschwitz with the explicit goal of documenting atrocities for the benefit of the outside world. This rediscovery led to a re-evaluation of Pilecki's contributions. He became a symbol of moral courage, someone who understood that individual action, combined with careful observation and meticulous documentation, could have an impact far beyond immediate survival, moral courage and sacrifice. What sets Pilecki apart is not just his strategic insight or bravery, but his moral clarity. He willingly accepted the risk of death to gather evidence of Nazi crimes. He endured beatings, starvation, and constant threat of execution, all to ensure that the outside world would know the truth. His actions underscore a fundamental lesson. In situations of extreme danger and oppression, individual initiative and ethical responsibility can shape history. Pilecki could have survived by remaining anonymous, blending in with the prisoners, and prioritizing his own life. Instead, he acted fully aware that his choice might, and ultimately would, cost him everything. This moral courage has inspired generations of historians, military analysts, and ordinary citizens. His story demonstrates the profound effect that one determined individual can have, even against the backdrop of a regime capable of orchestrating mass murder on an industrial scale. Pilecki in modern memory. Today, Pilecki is recognized internationally. Museums, memorials, and schools commemorate his life. His name appears in historical accounts of the Holocaust, and his reports are cited as primary evidence in the study of Nazi atrocities. In Poland, his recognition has been particularly significant. Post-communist Poland honored him with medals and official acknowledgement, and his life story has been incorporated into educational curricula. Young Poles learn not just about the horrors of Auschwitz, but about the power of observation, documentation, and courage to confront injustice. Internationally, Pilecki's story provides a framework for understanding the human dimensions of industrialized warfare. His intelligence reports offered insights into how bureaucracies and logistics enabled genocide and forced labor. They also illustrate how data, carefully collected and interpreted, can be used to prevent future atrocities, prosecute war criminals, and shape strategic policy. Lessons for the future. Several lessons emerge from Pilecki's life. The power of individual agency. One person, acting with determination, can gather intelligence that changes historical understanding and influences outcomes far beyond immediate events. The importance of documentation. In an era of mass violence and complex bureaucracies, meticulous records can reveal truths that might otherwise be lost or obscured. Pilecki's reports ensured that the reality of Auschwitz could not be denied. Moral responsibility in extreme circumstances. Facing overwhelming danger, Pilecki prioritized ethical duty over personal survival, demonstrating that courage is not only about physical risk, but also about maintaining moral integrity. The interplay of strategy and capacity. Just as strategic bombing surveys later demonstrated, material resources, production capacity, and logistical planning often determine the outcomes of conflicts more decisively than individual heroism alone. Pilecki's intelligence provided a human dimension to these lessons, showing how labor and coercion shaped industrial output under extreme conditions. The lasting impact of his work. Pilecki's intelligence was instrumental not only for post-war trials but also for historical scholarship. His observations of Auschwitz, the transport system, labor assignments, and camp administration allowed later historians to reconstruct the camp with unparalleled accuracy. Researchers studying the mechanisms of totalitarian control, industrialized murder, and resistance movements consistently reference his work. Furthermore, his approach to intelligence gathering, voluntary infiltration, systematic observation, careful recording, and safe delivery of critical information has influenced intelligence methodologies worldwide. Modern analysts study Pilecki as a case study in human intelligence, risk management, and ethical decision-making in extreme environments. A symbol of resistance. Ultimately, Witold Pilecki is remembered as a symbol of resistance, courage, and the power of knowledge. He demonstrated that even in situations where oppression seems total, individuals can act with purpose, collect critical intelligence, and influence outcomes in meaningful ways. His story is not just about survival in Auschwitz, nor merely about the risks he took. It is about the strategic application of human observation, the disciplined gathering of information, and the unwavering commitment to truth. Pilecki's life shows that moral and intellectual courage can alter the course of history, even in the darkest times. Conclusion. The lessons of Witold Pilecki. Witold Pilecki's life is a testament to the potential of human courage and strategic intelligence. From voluntarily entering Auschwitz to documenting its operations, escaping, and delivering intelligence that shaped historical understanding, his actions exemplify the intersection of moral clarity, personal bravery, and strategic insight. He reminds us that in any conflict, whether military or moral, understanding the human and material dimensions of the struggle is crucial. He illustrates that careful observation, meticulous documentation, and the willingness to act, even at immense personal risk, can preserve truth, protect lives, and influence the course of history. Today, Pilecki's reports remain a vital resource for historians, military strategists, and educators. His life and legacy continue to teach lessons about courage, morality, and the enduring impact of disciplined action against injustice. For all who study the Second World War, Auschwitz, and the broader history of resistance, Witold Pilecki stands as a beacon, a reminder that even in the face of overwhelming evil, one person's deliberate, courageous choices can illuminate the truth and help shape a better world.